Alright, final part of the war at sea, part 3. In this video I'm going to talk about U-boats. Okay, a very important part of the war at sea that you need to know about. U-boats. Okay, now U-boats, as we all know, are German submarines. It's short for Unterseeboats. For those of you who speak German, U-boats, German submarines. Okay, now they were very useful to the Germans because one, they could take out navy ships. You know, if you want to take out a massive dreadnought or battleship or cruiser, U-boats were quite useful for that because naturally being submarines, they're underneath the water. You don't quite know what depth they are at or where they are because you can't see them. And they can use torpedoes. They were very, very useful for taking out navy ships. They were also, though, for the Germans, very useful at taking out merchant ships, destroying merchant ships. Now, as I've talked about in a previous video, Britain, being an island, are very reliant on imports and exports. So any shipping, merchant shipping, that U-boats can disrupt or destroy for Germany, that's going to do them the world of good because, you know, hopefully, from a German perspective, you know, they're thinking hopefully we can starve Britain out of the war, much like they're trying to do with us with the blockade. Let's try and starve Britain out of the war, you know, damage morale, hopefully kill a few people in Britain from starvation, which was happening in Germany. You know, 300,000 people in Germany died of starvation or malnutrition as part of the blockade. So Germany are thinking, well, let's, you know, do the same thing with Britain. And as I say, U-boats were very useful at that, trying to disrupt British or Allied shipping. Now, the Germans used, during the war, something that you should really know about, so please make a note of this if you don't. You should know it. Year 10 we've done it this year, and Year 11 we did it last year. Unrestricted U-boat warfare. Please make sure you know about that because it's very, very important. This is key. Okay, it's not just that the Germans are using U-boats, it's that it's unrestricted U-boat warfare. Now, what that means, to remind you, what that means is, rather than stopping ships and searching them, which is what you're supposed to do, it's known as prize rules or cruiser rules, that's the done thing, rather than stopping a merchant ship and then searching it, and then allowing the sailors to get off and get to safety before you destroy it, if you want to destroy it. What the Germans do from early 1915 onwards is unrestricted U-boat warfare, and that means blowing up merchant ships or attacking merchant ships without stopping them, okay, without coming to the surface and stopping them, without giving them any warning. Okay, that's the controversial part of the Germans using U-boats. There's nothing wrong with them using U-boats if they're going to follow the rules, the established rules of prize rules, cruiser rules, letting merchant ships and the merchants on there, the sailors on there, you know, be safe and search the ships properly. It's the unrestricted U-boat warfare where they're not actually stopping these ships or warning these ships, they're just destroying them. That's the controversial part, and it's the unrestricted U-boat warfare that you really need to know about. Now, as you can imagine, and as you know, this was incredibly unpopular across the world. Okay, not only do Britain get angry about it, but other nations look at it in horror, particularly America. Okay, they see this as absolutely awful. These poor innocent sailors who are just, you know, delivering food or raw materials or whatever, you know, across the sea, are suddenly at risk from the Germans blowing them up without getting any warning or being allowed to get to safety. So it's derided really across the world. People look at what the Germans are doing with unrestricted warfare with real disgust. And as I say, it really turns countries like America against them. Now, as I say, the Germans make really good use of U-boats, and they actually did manage to seriously affect the food supplies in Britain, to the point where actually at one point in the war, Britain only had 6 weeks worth of grain left, and grain obviously, you know, used to make bread. So at one point in the war, it looked like we were literally about 6 weeks away from starvation or serious problems with food. And naturally rationing was brought in, partly as a result of, you know, the unrestricted U-boat warfare and the merchant shipping being disrupted and destroyed. So the Germans really do, you know, give Britain a run for their money, really. Naturally, as I said before, we are blockading Germany and really disrupting their food supplies, but, you know, they do us quite a bit of damage as well. But as much as U-boat warfare or unrestricted U-boat warfare is useful in disrupting the food supplies and general supplies to Britain, as we know, you should know, U-boat warfare or unrestricted U-boat warfare actually does do Germany a lot of harm as well. Okay, and it does that in two ways. Has a detrimental effect on Germany in two ways, and they're both here for you. Okay, I'll hold that up there. Number one, Germany in 1915 sank the Lusitania. This was a passenger liner, and on board were, well, many people, including over 100 American citizens who were killed. So in 1915, Germany ended up killing over 100 American people on board the Lusitania. Now at this point, Germany is not at war with America. So again, America in particular look at this with, shock, horror, disgust, anger, quite rightly. And it really goes a long way to turning many people in America who at first did not want to be in the war. They didn't want to have anything to do with the First World War. They saw it as a European problem. Let's stay out of it. It's got nothing to do with America. Let's keep out of it. From after 1915, there are many people in America who think, actually, Germany have done something awful here to us, so maybe, just maybe, we might think about getting involved in the war. Okay. The second reason, as you can see here, is unrestricted U-boat warfare resumed in early 1917. Sorry, I should have said after the Lusitania was sunk, Germany halted unrestricted U-boat warfare. Midway through 1915, they said, "Okay, we better stop this because we've really upset America, quite rightly, or understandably, I should say. So maybe we need to put a halt on unrestricted U-boat warfare because it's actually landing us in a whole heap of trouble." But from early 1917 it resumed, and after this, fairly soon after this, in April 1917, America declared war on Germany because they were so disgusted and angered at unrestricted U-boat warfare. So you can see it really, and they joined Britain and France and Russia on the Allied side. So you can see it really does, as good as it is in terms of limiting Britain's supply line, it also does an awful lot of damage to Germany because in the end, it brings America into the war, and as you well know, that is a big or a main reason, a major factor in Germany eventually losing the war in 1918. America make a big difference towards the end of the war, particularly in the 100 Days Offensive. Okay, so it was, on the one hand, it was really good for Germany, but at the same time, in the long run, it actually had quite a bad effect on them, quite a bad impact. Okay. Now, another thing that I want to talk about with U-boats is not just, the effect it had, but also how Britain and the Allies dealt with U-boats. Okay, so how did we deal with U-boats? Well, I'm going to talk about 4 ways. Okay, the first one that I want to talk about is Q ships. Okay, now Q ships, again, all this should be ringing some bells, but Q ships were merchant ships, so supply ships, that had heavy guns hidden on them. So what would happen is the U-boat would surface from under the water, and it would stop the merchant ship to come and search it, and as it surfaced, the Q ship would basically get these guns out that have been hidden and attack the U-boat and sink the U-boat. And this is early on in the war, and this is part of the reason why, after about a year of the war going on, or less than a year actually, the Germans say, right, well, we're going to have to stop searching these merchant ships because a lot of them are Q ships and they're sinking us. So that's part of the reason why unrestricted U-boat warfare becomes a thing, a policy for Germany, because at first they've been following the rules of prize rules or cruiser rules and stopping these merchant ships, but actually it's been getting many of the U-boats damaged and attacked and sunk. So they call a halt to that and start using unrestricted U-boat warfare, and that actually, as I said before, lands them in a whole heap of trouble. Kind of damned if they do and damned if they don't. So that's one way, Q ships, that Britain and the Allies tried to deal with U-boats, German U-boats. Another way is mines. Now, mines were really effective. In fact, more U-boats were sunk or destroyed by mines than any other method that I've talked about or I'm going to talk about. It's really effective, not just at sinking and destroying U-boats, but it actually really protects the English Channel, because we have many mines laid in the English Channel that the U-boats can't really go near or risk being sunk. And naturally, the English Channel is really important for us, for Britain, because as I've said in a previous video, we're an island, and we need to get our troops and supplies delivered to France and Belgium, and likewise need to pick up soldiers from France and Belgium if they need to come home. So we needed to kind of keep the English Channel clear, and mines were really effective there because there was a big minefield that we lay that, as I say, really kind of restricted the U-boats. They couldn't really come into the English Channel because they were at real risk of being sunk. So mines were very successful. Similar to mines, another method that we used were depth charges. Okay, now depth charges, I've talked about these before in lesson, are basically bombs that can be timed to go off at a certain depth. Now, during World War I, sonar, which some of you might be familiar with, which is a way of working out where things are underwater by kind of listening to signals. It was in very early development in the First World War, but that, in conjunction with depth charges, were used. So sailors on boats would be able to listen to these underwater noises and would be able to work out, more or less, where the U-boats were, or at what depth they were anyway. So these depth charges could be timed to go off at a certain depth. So if you thought, right, well, the U-boat is 100 metres below us, then you could set a depth charge, or depth charges, to go off at 100 metres. So they were quite successful. And finally, the final method that I'm going to talk about that the British and the Allies used on U-boats, or tried to use on U-boats, was convoys. Okay, and you should know about this already as well. Convoys. Now, towards the end of the war, kind of mid-1917 onwards, Britain and America used convoys. Merchant ships, rather than travelling by themselves, would now travel in groups of merchant ships, and they'd be guarded or protected by warships, navy ships, British and American navy ships. And this was really successful as well. It really reduced the amount of losses that Britain and America were suffering. Because, as I say, the merchant ships, if a U-boat came to attack them, they'd have some protection from not only the other ships around them, because the U-boat can only attack one ship at a time, but also the navy ships would be there to turn around and try and attack the U-boat using things like depth charges and the like. Okay, so that's U-boats. Okay, why it's significant in the whole story of the war, in the war at sea, how it's an advantage for Germany, but also a massive disadvantage in the long run, and how Britain and the Allies tried to deal with them. So again, that will hopefully clear up any issues that you had with U-boats. So that's the war at sea. So we've covered early battles in the war at sea, we've covered Jutland and U-boats, and remember, if you look back at the first video, there is a link for the Gallipoli campaign video on there as well, so use that if you need to. I'll be making a few more videos over the next few days. Again, if you have any requests for videos in the future, I'll leave the comment section below open, so if you have any requests, leave some comments there, but other than that, I will see you soon.